Hi, we're going to tackle chapter one, which covers a lot of the basics of communication, and that'll serve as the foundation for this course. Okay, communication sounds pretty self explanatory. Basically, a very rudimentary definition is that communication is all about making connections with other people. Even though we live in a highly connected world with all of our devices, we aren't always necessarily truly connected when it comes to communication, especially face to face communication. So, this class is all about developing communication competence that will help you not only speak in front of others, but just to speak in general in our one to one interactions with other people as well. So, what is communication? The definition in the textbook is the simultaneous sharing and creating of meaning through human symbolic interaction. Basically, we use communication to connect with other people. It's something that dates back to ancient Greece. Now, a few of the things in these PowerPoint slides don't always come directly from the textbook, but from some of the other classes I've taught in the past. And it's important for you to realize that communication does date back to ancient Greece. This is not something new. The word rhetoric, which is basically the art of speaking well, is sometimes used interchangeably for oratory. Both of them are usually used in connection with persuasive speaking. I'm sure you've heard the word forensics, and typically when we hear of forensics now, we think of CSI shows and things like that in investigative type stuff. But forensics is public speaking. And in ancient Greece, the well rounded man had to be able to speak well in front of others in order to defend himself, things like that. So we use rhetoric to persuade public policy, to make decisions. It's a very important part of our day to day life. Okay, so a little bit more about the roots goes back to Aristotle and eventually Cicero. But these five canons of rhetoric really apply to the way we attack public speaking today. So, first of all, you got to come up with an idea. That's your invention. What are you going to talk about? Then the arrangement is how are you going to organize it? What kind of style are you going to use? Everybody has their own signature style. Are you going to commit it to memory, which in ancient Greece they had to? And how are you going to deliver it? And what type of format? Is it going to be in a small room or in a grand amphitheater where you're going to have to really project? So it's an important life skill. That's why this is a requirement at almost every college. It gives you an edge. There is power in the ability to speak confidently. It should build your confidence and give you satisfaction that you are doing something that most people are scared to death of. It will definitely help you in any career. So, why should we study it? Why do you have to take this class? It's important, more so now than ever, because of this technological world that we live in, to become a good communicator. And it will definitely give you an edge in finding that career, acing that interview. And it's also important that we talk about ethics when we become better communicators. It's an important tool in our very engaged multicultural society. It should help you become a better citizen that you're just generally going to know more about. So it'll help you research topics that are meaningful to you, hopefully be open minded and consider alternate viewpoints. Through communication, you can choose a course of action. Hopefully, you also develop an ability to better distinguish the difference between arguments and things that are just flat out uncivil, which is definitely becoming an increasing problem today. So, public speaking is an acquired skill. You're not born with it. Some people are a little bit more gregarious or natural, but it's a skill, meaning the more you do it, the better you're going to get at it. It improves with practice. And there are a lot of similarities to speaking and writing. There's some connections there. So, a lot of things in this class are going to be things that you already rely on in other courses. So, some things to think about. What are both the positive and negative impacts of technology on our daily communication? How has that impacted the way that you communicate with others? For instance, how often do you call and talk to somebody, or even engage with them face to face when you can, do a quick DM or text them instead? Sometimes I think all this connection is actually disconnecting us. How has communicating through social media impacted your interpersonal relationships? Has it helped you grow more friendships, deeper relationships, or has it made them more shallow? What are some of the telltale signs of a poor communicator? What are some signals that somebody really struggles with communication? But on the other hand, what are some of those attributes that makes a good communicator stand out? That's our goal. Okay, some basic definitions that are throughout this chapter. Communication is definitely a process. It doesn't have a beginning and an end. Often it's very circular or very messy, where we're, more than one person is speaking at one time. So you're trying to speak and listen at the same time. It is a system. There's a lot of different communication theories about this, but there's a lot of different interconnected elements. It's transactional because we're actually sending and receiving things very simultaneously. And we all know that communication can be both intentional and unintentional. Like, "Oh, that's not what I meant," or "I didn't mean to say that." Once something's out there, we can never truly retract it, though. This is a very popular diagram of the communication process. Even though it shows it as a circle, it's often a lot messier than that. So your speaker and receiver are going back and forth, and especially the more people you have engaged, like in a small group, that's going to get a lot more messy. Okay, so some of the other components. Communication involves both a source, a sender, and a receiver. You've got to have at least two of those things to make it work. And in order to communicate, you have to have something to share, a message. Now, this is some terms that you might not be as familiar with. Okay, it's up to the source or the sender to do some encoding. Basically, that means we think before we speak. And many of us, myself included, struggle with that. Now, the receiver has to decode whatever it is you say. It sounds simple that, okay, I said that, they should understand it. But there's so many different layers. Think about just text messages. And when you get a message, for instance, if it's in all caps, you have to decode that. Is it something really important? Are they really excited or are they really upset? So there's a lot of encoding and decoding that goes both ways. So keep in mind the sender encodes, think before you speak, and the receiver decodes, tries to interpret what you meant. Okay, noise is a huge factor, and noise isn't just things that we physically hear. In any given classroom, there could be a wide variety of noise. Could be some outside distractions, could be a loud furnace or air conditioner, could be somebody sniffling, somebody whispering, crumpling papers. There's a lot of different things. But a lot of times, the major noise or interference isn't always external. It's not always the things we hear, it's the stuff that's going on inside of us. So, physical noise are things that we can hear, like coughing, phones vibrating, and such. There's also environmental noise. For instance, if a room is really chilly or really stuffy and hot, that can interfere with your ability to concentrate and connect. But the biggest factor, I think, is psychological noise. Those distractions that get in the way. Think about any time you're sitting in a class and all the different things that are going through your mind when you should be listening. Maybe you're hyped up for a big game, or you're worried about a test, or you just got in a fight with a boyfriend or girlfriend, or you're simply hungry. Those are all things that psychologically can interfere with communication. Some other components. The channel is how we send it. So a lot of times it's face to face using an auditory channel. It could be touch. Somebody's having a bad day and you give them a pat, or somebody did something awesome, you give them a high five. Or you could be texting. That's a totally different type of channel. Feedback is the response that you get from the person you're communicating with. It's not always oral, meaning it doesn't always involve words. It could sometimes be frowns, or applause, or a wink, a wide variety of things. The environment is the situation in which you're doing the communicating, and the context is the circumstances at hand. That can vary all the time. So we should always work at being a more competent communicator. Realize that interference can get in the way. There are things that can get in the way that are out of our control. So always focus on what you can control. And we all need to work harder at being careful at choosing the words that we're going to use. Think before we hit send, for instance. We need to encode. Observe our listeners, analyze feedback, and remember that listening, which is the other chapter, is just as important as when it comes to being a good communicator. Okay, two terms important to distinguish is intrapersonal and interpersonal. Some of you might talk to yourself, but we all do. We might not necessarily talk to ourselves out loud, but we're always sending messages to ourselves. So intrapersonal is a communication that occurs within ourselves, whereas interpersonal is a communication that happens with other people. It could be dyadic, just two different people. It could be through an interview, small groups, at the workplace. There's a wide variety that interpersonal communication occurs. Okay, so public speaking is the main thing we're going to do in this class. And even if in your future career you don't do formal public speaking, there's going to be a ton of skills that you can take from this class that will help you in your future career. Public speaking, unlike our interpersonal, more casual speaking, is definitely going to be a little bit more structured. And typically it's going to be to either inform, persuade, or entertain, or suit a certain occasion. Okay, next slide. Okay, some of the types. Mass communication. That's where your audience isn't physically right there. So you might be communicating through social media, through the actual media like TV or newspapers or a YouTube blog, things like that. But they mentioned social media as a separate layer. These two are very connected. But think about all the ways that you spend your time, especially with TikTok and things like that, all forms of very important communication. Okay, some myths and truths. Communication does not have the magical power to fix all of our problems. It's very important, but communication in and of itself can't fix everything. Quantity does not make up quality. Meaning lies in people and not in the words we use. Meaning lies in both, so it's important to be careful with those words. We are not born with the ability to communicate effectively. It's a skill that improves with practice. So if it's something you're very intimidated about, just keep in mind that that's the whole goal of this class, so that we practice more and that we get more comfortable, and that by the time May comes around, you feel a little bit more comfortable with this activity. And unfortunately, when it comes to communication, there's not an undo, reset, redo button. Once something's said, text said, written, we can't just undo it. So be careful with that encoding. Okay, so looking back on the chapter, it's important to understand the role that communication plays in your daily life all the time. Recognize that there's many misconceptions about what it means to be a good communicator. Hopefully this class really helps increase your knowledge about what it means to be a competent communicator, and that in order to be competent, we are going to do some multitasking. You're both listening and communicating at the same time. Okay, so looking back on this chapter, what's your takeaway? What's one thing in this chapter that you thought really kind of hit home, something that you think will help you grow as a communicator? Okay, so in a nutshell, that is chapter 1. We'll get more videos uploaded for the upcoming chapters as well. Let me close this out and make sure you read the chapter and study it. Be ready for